really like narrative, but I also like everything that's sort of beside it, right? How did I find it? Just by trying, as always. I mean, I had a kind of a really good initial idea of a structure of these sort of chapters that are sort of built concentrically, and there would be a work at the center of each one. But one of the interesting things we did is that when we were working over at Hexagram with a group of grad students, we would do these little sketches of things, right? We just try things out while I was still filming and collecting stuff. So by the time we really got to the editing itself, which was a very intense, daily, 10 hours a day activity, it took us a while to get into it, but actually we were not editing that long. It was all told for a film like this with this amount of material. It was about 5 months of solid work with breaks in between. So I think that one of the ways of finding the film is just how long it just sort of percolated. Yeah, but it's I mean, I had a good idea of some things, but other things it was just a question of trying and changing and trying and changing. Yeah.
So lots of iterations, lots of combinations.
Yeah, but the basic sort of how it would and could work, I knew even during the filming. This thing of all the different textures and the sort of perceptual changes that happen inside it, that I knew already when I was filming, for sure. This was not just sort of built in editing. It was kind of, it was a continuous sort of process, evolving process. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Question. It was a huge decision, Carolee Schneemann, whoa, how am I going to put my voice in it? What are people going to say? Oh my God, what's she going to think? But I was really interested in this idea of somehow unveiling the hidden power structures in documentary as well. The voices of authority. I mean, it's me, but it's just the next generation of women or human beings. And it sort of ties into what I was saying to Frank, that what does it mean for us anyway? Why do we make films about art anyway? And what does it mean when we do? So I thought, well, it's kind of that the intended effect was that through the sort of search of the filmmaker, everyone else kind of comes along and searches with me. And that was my hope, that well, first of all, there are no sort of, it lays it out. It's not, it's profoundly didactic, but it's certainly not didactic in that sense that, we've been accustomed to by television. So I think it brings in, it's like the seer in the scene. There's something about that, that idea that we see, we observe, but we, sort of consciousness is about seeing oneself seeing, or something like that. So I was interested in all of those ideas. I mean, in fact, in some implicit way, this is a little bit of a documentary about documentary, very frankly, right? It's, yeah. I mean, I wanted it to be that, because what does Schneemann do with her art? She documents her life, not as autobiography, not as, as a more than a witness, as a participant, of life. That's all her work. I don't like to call it autobiographical because it's not, but it's like witnessing the time, and it's like taking a stand on the time, right? So, obviously, a documentary about somebody who documents is, by its very nature, reflexive. But I also don't like reflexive because it's like representation, reflexive. We don't really know what that means anymore. We use it too much. So I tried to show what I think I mean by it through the film. That's Catherine van der Donck, primarily, and Benoit Dam, very importantly, as well. Those of you that know the Montreal documentary scene know that Catherine van der Donck's got to be one of the most brilliant documentary people, because she's more than just somebody who records. She also thinks deeply about sound, sound and reality. I was recently at an event at the Cinémathèque where, oh my God, for the first time they're talking about sound. We're so happy because we never talk about sound. And Esther Rouget, who's also really well known in the sound documentary world, said, well, we all know that in documentary the image is the outside and the sound is the inside. Now, I don't agree with that. I think that both are both. But Catherine and Benoit, who do a lot of sound for Quebec documentaries, so whenever they were between gigs, we'd work together, and it was how shall I say? They really hacked away at it, because in their mind, you know, you change location, you change sound ambience, whereas I said no. Yes, we're there, but ultimately we're in our minds and we're supposed to be. So there's some kind of a displacement that I wanted to happen, and they found it, right? They found it. Also, you know, like Monique, the editor, found it. You know, we were all looking, searching. That was what was so great about this project, is that it really was what should be called and is called like a research project, meaning that you sort of know what you're looking for, but you while you're looking, you're also finding, and then you know more what you're looking for. So this idea of dislocating time and space, of being there and not being there, and changing and falling into it and falling out of it, it was the sort of formal idea of the film. And so that's, of course, the sound is fabulous. They worked like crazy. They were pulling their hair out. No. Once the cut, I mean, Catherine would come and see the film, and she'd talk about it, and she was even on one or two shoots, so she was aware of it, and I would, yeah, I'd be talking about it. And so once the cut was done, they started. And it did take a long time, but it took a long time because they had other gigs and I had no money, so. But there was, huge attention and effort. And, you know, this layering of the sound, you know, I would record things very often, several times, because I knew I wanted to see if I can't sort of use these different recordings, some purposefully done on a really cheap little recorder, and some like super recorded, and there's this. In fact, the sound sort of behaves like the image in this film, in the sense of its textures and in its spaces, right? The acoustics, you know, because when we hear sound, we're in a closed room, we're inside our bodies, we're outside it, we're in a huge auditorium like here, we're in remembering, we're in, you know, it's all of those sort of spaces for sound, yeah. Well, I think what's happened is that, you know, as filmmakers, we got to make the work we got to make, that's for sure. So I ain't gonna change that if you paid me $1 million. But as I discovered, and it was very interesting to discover it, is just how these little worlds that we want to see talking to each other don't. So the film couldn't find its place in the experimental film world, except for views of the avant-garde and experimental, because of two fantastic programmers that are just, you know, they just don't worry about anything. They just take what they like. But in many, many, many other experimental festivals, oh man, this is a documentary, we can't take it. In many documentary festivals, they were saying, this is not a documentary, we can't take it. And then, so it's really found itself between the genres, and I actually take great pleasure in that, because it sort of gave me a fantastic map of things, you know, of how institutionalized, really, things have become, so that if one is sort of working between things, and I think that working between things is where it's at today, in all ways, right? In all ways, right? In disciplines, I just think we got to start talking to each other, you know? But there are vested interests. I mean, there are reasons for this, right? And so, you know, that was interesting to see. And one thing I have seen, because, you know, the film has sort of no power coming from money, meaning a big advertising machine behind it, nothing. So it'll, you know, kind of truzzle on its little way. But people get it, man. People get it. From all these different areas, from all these different cultures, people understand this film. And to me, get it, in a sense, more than understand, you know, feel it. And to me, this is super. And it just shows me that those sort of closed, little institutionalized units just, you know, they don't work anymore. Totally. I don't like to say it's about her, I never do. I love to say it's through her.
Right.
Right? It's about seeing, and because it's about seeing, it's about the relation of art and life, you know, the fusion of art and life, because it's about seeing. Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I make documentaries, because I like to be influenced, right? I mean, you know, when you work very long on a project, no matter who you're working with, it changes you, and of course. However, I have known about her work since I was in my 20s. On a previous film called Bad Girl, I did a fair amount of research about her, because I, you know, kind of rediscovered her. And really it was as a result of doing Bad Girl that I made this film, because, that's what happens. When you make films, you know, you're always sort of dialoguing with the world, but you're always dialoguing with yourself as well, right? So it influenced me to the extent that certain decisions, you know, real filmmaking, formal decisions, came out of her material. You know, what you said about you don't know where the shooting begins and ends, well, I knew from the get-go that, I mean, you know, at least 80, if not 90% of the Super 8 stuff I shot, right? I knew from the get-go that because I did not want to have this separation of real, not real, dream, not dream, yesterday, today, all of that, that one of the ways to achieve this would be absolutely to try to have it merge, you know? So I was very happy when somebody
had a Super 8 camera that I borrowed, and the shutter wasn't quite working, and it's lovely, I love it, because that's the kind of filming that she often did, right? Kind of off the cuff, right? But also what influenced me is thinking about the body and what that could mean in documentary. Meaning how, you know, she's a painter, I'm a cinematographer, you know, how do our sort of bodily rhythms, you know, how does it work, you know? How does it work when we want to be kind of in something as opposed to looking at it from the outside, which is what a lot of documentaries do, right? So I'm not saying that that's bad or anything, but I was particularly interested in this question. So it's both, I mean, that sort of predicated my choice of subject, of wanting to make a film about her because of that, but it's one thing to decide it, and then in course you also, yeah, you change, you're supposed to change. There's something wrong if you don't change, right? I mean, we're supposed to be changed by looking at films too, right? In some way, or art, or philosophy, or biology, or, you know. Well, it's interesting, in some kind of psychic way maybe, but she never saw a single frame of the film until it was done, 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 done.
Well, I was going to ask, like,
Yeah.
not necessarily that she worked on the film, but what your discussion with her was beforehand and how you approached her to make the film and how that would go, and if she's had offers from other people and turn them down, or which I would assume she has.
That was such a good question. Oh my God. Yeah, I would tell her what I'm doing since I knew I couldn't show her anything. If you knew who Carolee is, you would know why. She's extremely decisive. If she doesn't like it, she just says, this is terrible. I love that about her. I really like that kind of straightforward thing, but I knew it was just too risky to show her something before I was done. Besides which, I really was convinced, profoundly convinced, sort of ethically, morally convinced, that I'm not in any way betraying either her or any of her ideas. Now, of course, I hoped she would accept it, but I was ready in case she didn't, because I was sure that this is the film I wanted to make. So I talked to her a lot about what I wanted to do. Nevertheless, I think she had expectations that would be a more conventional film about art. You know, we're all really used to this idea that, you know, you get, I don't know if you saw the Abramovich film, it's a great model, right, of, you know, we're really told that this is a great artist by the important curators and critics, and, you know, they're very much, so Carolee, I think, sort of, she knew, I told her straight out that I'm not talking to any experts, that she's the expert and that's it, but she didn't, I mean, kind of knocked her off her seat with tears and everything when she saw it, right? So she has accepted it. But it took a lot of my talking and explaining. And one of the interesting things is, you know, she did have a studio in Montreal that we see several times. The large space is her Montreal studio. And so it meant that once a month she would come up for a couple of days. So I saw her very regularly over the years, very regularly, which I think also has really built a kind of an intimacy because it was very sustained. And in that sense, I would say collaboration, in the sense that it was a lot of just talking, a dialogue, like a total dialogue, and a kind of a profound, some kind of a profound sense. And you know, I by the, you know, into my third year or something, I could literally, she'd leave, you know, for the day or sometimes for several days, and I'd leave. I was totally allowed to go everywhere and dig into anything. And it means that some sort of totally profound trust set in, and I think that was the result of this dialogue. So it's kind of an interesting question of yours about sort of human processes in the course of making a film. And then second part of your question, were there other people? Oh my God, yes. And I was just the first at the finish line. So, phew. But when I was looking for money, I didn't immediately get the first Shirk application I applied for. Oh yeah, and one lovely filmmaker that I was really, really afraid would, because she works out of Austria and she's made some wonderful, wonderful films, and she was sort of like kind of, you know, kind of circling around, and I could do nothing. You know what I mean? We you know, we want it all to go on scene as quickly as possible, right? But it's just that. You know, it's kind of constellations. It's just amazing, you know, how much chance is involved in these things. You know, her place is a 5-hour drive from Montreal. She had a studio in Montreal. I don't know, I was just the right person at the right place, you know, and I felt that. I felt I was the right person. And you know, I mean, there could be 5 other films made, and they'll all be different, so that's cool.